on this special live edition of Locked On Raptors here on a Thursday. We dig into the Toronto Raptors not doing a whole lot at the deadline outside of adding one Jakob Poeltl. We will dig into what it means. We'll dig into whether it's good or not. We'll take your questions as well on this live edition of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1339, a special live recording of Locked On Raptors here on Thursday, February the 9th. I'm, of course, your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons and have yet to see a weirder trade deadline than this one. You can, of course, follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Raptors. You can follow me at Woodley Sean, where you can find all of my work from my many years covering the Toronto Raptors. You can also go to YouTube, hit the big red subscribe button. You're watching it here if you're presumably seeing it live. So hit the YouTube subscribe button to support the show, get in the chat, all that good stuff. And I will get to some questions at the end of the show as well. Lots to get to on the show. We're first going to tell you about our friends at FanDuel who are bringing you today's show, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, so we're going to run through the downsides of standing pat and adding Poeltl, standing Poeltl, if you will. We will get to your questions at the end of the show, but off the top, I want to kind of get into my initial feelings on what the Raptors did. We did the show earlier with Jakob Poeltl, breaking down the Jakob Poeltl trade and sort of couching our judgment before knowing exactly what the team was going to do before 3 o'clock today. As it turns out, they did nothing else. It sounds like there were things on the table, potentially. There are rumors, reports from Clippers beat reporters about how Terrence Mann in a first-round pick was too rich for the Clippers' blood for a Fred VanVleet trade. If that's the case, then I think the Raptors were right to not make that trade. We talked about Terrence Mann being the guy I wanted to see come back the entire lead up to the deadline. If the Clippers weren't going to play ball there, then I think they were right to not move on from Fred. There were reports that OG Anunoby was the apple of the Warriors' eye, potentially, and maybe there was a deal there. However, the reporting suggests that the Warriors bristled at the idea of Jonathan Kuminga and picks for OG. And if that's the case, then I don't blame the Raptors for not doing anything at the deadline. If the deals were not there, then the deals were not there. And I know this is probably a disappointing turn of events for Raptors fans, right? It's been a tough season. They're 26-30. It's not been a very fun time. That said, I can see the logic here, especially after hearing Masai Ujiri talk. I can see the logic of what the Raptors are doing. And as much as this is not what I would have done, I said going into the deadline, I think an OG trade was the thing to do to clear future money troubles, to replenish the cupboards with extra picks. They're now out a first-round pick compared to 24 hours ago. It's tough stuff. It's not what I would have done. I think earlier on the show, I said it was about a C grade for me, the Jakob Poeltl trade, and I think I'm still there with the potential for it to get worse or better as time goes on here. Ultimately, I don't think this is some foolish death knell of a move by the Raptors. I don't think this suggests that the front office is washed. I don't think this suggests that the Raptors don't have a plan. In fact, I would argue this clarifies the Raptors' vision more than anything they've done over the last couple seasons. What did we talk about all season long is what was the thing missing from this team? It was rim protection. It was a center. It was also other players to soak up more minutes so 7 or 8 guys aren't playing 39 minutes a night. They ended up addressing that with this move. Yes, it might seem late in the game. If there is one thing to quibble with, I might have said do this earlier in the season. Obviously, you require the other team to play ball in that situation. And from all accounts, the Spurs wanted 2 first-rounders for Jakob Poeltl, a month and a half ago. You weren't getting him for the price you probably got him for the day before the deadline a month ago. So that's not even necessarily a super fair thing to say. But that I think is the argument, is they waited too long. It's too late in the game now to have saved this season. You look at the standings, obviously they're in 10th right now. They're still 4.5 games out of the 6th seed. I don't think I'm putting any hopes on making a run at number 6, 7, or 8. Certainly not out of the question, especially considering the ease of the schedule coming up. That's a lot of teams to jump. But I do think this is, again, a declaration of what the vision for the Raptors is. And I kind of think it's the exact same vision that led them to a championship in the last decade, which is collect good players, have good basketball players on your roster, be good, stay relevant, and then wait for the opportunity to strike when it arises, whether it's a Kawhi Leonard or a disgruntled star of some kind, whether it's you get into the playoffs and you run into good injury luck like the Raptors certainly did when they won the title. It doesn't take away them winning the title, but they did get a lot of injury luck in that title run for sure, I mean, specifically in the finals with Kevin Durant. It's not, again, the perfect outcome here for the deadline, I don't think, but I also completely understand the logic of keeping your guys together, not trading guys for the sake of trading guys just because it seems like the standard, practice of what you do when you're losing in a season and the deadline comes about. This is the Raptors, A, banking on their ability to keep their guys, and B, banking on their ability to build upon what has, yes, been a disappointing season, but is also a team that a year ago won 48 games and was, quote unquote, the team no one wanted to play in the first round. Came into this season highly, projected within the standings, everyone smacking the over. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, and this season has been a disappointment. But I think there's a difference between playing poorly and actually being a bad team. And all of the numbers suggest that this isn't actually a bad team. The individual players are very good. We know this. There's a reason there was a bidding war, it seemed. Maybe not enough of a bidding war, but there was clearly some sort of bidding war for these various guys, and they were coveted around the league, OG in particular. There's a reason that there was that hype of this team coming into the year. There's a reason they won 48 games last year. They have good players on hand. It hasn't worked this year. The mix has been off, of course. And how you address the mix, I don't really know. Maybe Jakob Poeltl coming in solidifies some roles. Maybe it moves Gary Trent Jr. to a bench role of some kind, pressures Achua back to the bench. You have more of a stable rotation. You get guys are able to sort of know the pockets of the game they're going to slot in, whatever it might be. I do think that this, again, clarifies that this team is not bottoming out. I think them trading the first round pick kind of suggested that was not going to happen. They didn't trade this year's first round pick, and I think that's very good. Smart move. Even if it's maybe going to end up being like the 13th or 14th or 17th pick in the draft. But like this signals their intentions. Their intentions are keep good players on the team, be as good as possible, try to capture whatever they had last year with the addition of a real center, which has been the thing that's plagued them all season long. Get 26 games to look at this group and see what you do next. Maybe that leads to a trade of OG Anunoby at the deadline. Maybe that means you go and you ship off a guy in a sign and trade, whether it's Fred or it's Trent. Maybe you bring back all three and trade off a Chris Boucher or something like that to free up the money to make it happen and stay under the tax. All those things are possible, and there are plenty of ways this could blow up in the Raptors' face, right? Like, they could lose guys in the offseason. They could never cash in on OG's value, end up overpaying him in 18 months and be locked into him at a deal that maybe isn't as favorable as his contract is right now. Obviously, you have the tensions of ball dominance and who's getting the possessions and all that going on too. That didn't get addressed here by any means. There's still ways in which this can go wrong, but in general, my philosophy, if you've watched this show throughout however long, I've been doing it for 7 years now, has always been bottoming out is not my style, not what I would like to see. I'd like to see a team try to be competitive and good. And when you have good players, to me, the logic is let's see if we can milk a good team out of the good players as opposed to shipping off said good players for deals that aren't exactly going to match your requirements. So I understand the potential disappointment in what the Raptors did or didn't do here. I understand those who wanted to see a big offseason overhaul or a deadline overhaul, and that still could come. I also completely understand the logic, and in general, I don't mind the philosophy of giving it more time, being patient, seeing how things work, and especially Masai Ujiri said this in his media availability after the deadline, in that he kind of copped to, if there's a thing where I failed in, it was in not putting the guys like Jakob Poeltl, getting those guys that they clearly needed, the needs that needed to be filled, addressed sooner. And I think it's a totally, fair thing on Masai's front as far as just like being a boss to say, you know what, I didn't put the people under me in the best position to succeed. Let's get a guy who can help with that. And if that doesn't help matters, then we revisit things and maybe bigger changes are made in the offseason. I still think there's totally the possibility that OG gets moved at the draft, for example. Maybe they even open up Pascal Siakam discussions in the offseason. I doubt that's going to happen. But I think what they've done here at the deadline, while it seems disappointing, there's a logic to it that in general I agree with. Even if coming into the deadline I would have said, get off OG if you can and get what you can for him. If the deals weren't there, then that becomes a lot harder. And as Masai said as well, the deals just weren't there. We're going to come back. I'm going to get into, the significant downsides, things where this could really go wrong for the Raptors in a hot second. Before we do that, however, I do have to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel, who are the official sportsbook of Locked On, who are good friends to us. And the Super Bowl is coming up this weekend. They're the app you got to have. You could have your mozzarella sticks or your wings or your veggie tray or whatever, but instead, why don't you get the FanDuel app and you will have yourself a great time during the Super Bowl. You can download the FanDuel app now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who's going to score a touchdown to Gatorade colors to coin flips. All of it under the sun over there on FanDuel. They also have their in-game parlays, same-game parlays as well. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, it's super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL and Locked On. All right, let's dive into where this could go wrong for the Raptors. And there are plenty of avenues in which this goes wrong. The obvious thing is, for me, the part where if you're going to tell me that this is a bad deadline for the Raptors, going into the offseason with 3 very important pending UFAs is the thing to sell me on that case, because it's queasy. It makes you feel pretty unsure about how it's all going to look, especially when you consider one of the issues going on this season, at least the burblings, the rumblings, the sort of underneath stuff has been, the general vibes within the team have been off. The hierarchy's been off. There's been not a ton of role definition. There's been tension over possession, stuff like that. If you read the reports, believe the reports, that seems to have been a thing that's been a through line throughout this season. And again, this move doesn't address that at all. And if you go into the offseason and say a Gary Trent Jr. was hoping to have some touches freed up for him at the deadline, only to have another guy added to the mix that's going to probably trim his minutes just a smidge, maybe that's something that you don't love. and maybe that puts you at risk of losing a Gary Trent Jr. for nothing. I don't think Jakob Poeltl is a flight risk. Obviously, dear friends with Pascal Siakam. He's a Raptors guy from the draft, obviously. There seems to be a pretty good relationship there, and there will be a very clear starting role for him on this team going forward if he does, in fact, sign a new deal. My guess is his new deal comes in around $16 to $18 million a year. That's perfectly fine for a starter, I think, especially a starter who addresses your needs the way Jakob Poeltl does. Where it gets interesting is with the Fred and the Gary Trent stuff. The Raptors have a history of using bird rights as a tool, as a weapon, as a thing to be traded for. I think that's what you're seeing with Jakob Poeltl, same way they did with Serge Ibaka, for example, back in the day. They trade for Serge, uses bird rights, keep him around. That's easy. And Jakob Poeltl, I think a lot like Gary Trent Jr., is like the type of player who gets squeezed by the open market quite a bit, because when you go into the open market, there's only so many teams with cap space, and they're probably devoting that cap space to better players than your Jakob Poeltls, Gary Trent Jr.'s, your fifth starters of the world. And so I think those two guys, in theory, should be pretty easy to retain. Fred VanVleet, obviously, maybe there's a bit more of a flight risk there. The Orlando Magic are going to have a lot of cap space. They seem like they're interested. The Phoenix Suns, who knows what's going to happen with Chris Paul here. Maybe that's something that comes back around. They've been rumored as a potential VanVleet free agent destination even before the Kevin Durant trade. And I wonder, depending on how the playoffs go, if that rears its head again in the offseason. The downside here is you lose one or more than one of those guys for nothing in the offseason. I can't imagine they went into this thinking we don't stand a chance of keeping these guys. There's very clearly agent conversations that go on. This is a thing. It's constant communication. It's not like they just call up Fred VanVleet's agent on July the 1st to be like, hey, you want to sign? Like, they've talked. There's conversations going on there. And so I bet they feel like they have a good chance of retaining them all. That said, weird things happen. The last 26 games go super awry, and then you're in a bit of a pickle coming into the offseason. There's also the financial question, right? As was noted in the conversation here from a couple people. the money is going to be hard. They're going to have, as it stands right now, about $60 million to work with under the tax to try to sign those 3 guys in the offseason, assuming that you waive Thad Young later on in the offseason before his guarantee date for next season. I think the concern there is, how are you overpaying? Are you going to overpay these guys? Are you going to lowball them and have them look elsewhere because you're working within confines of the amount of money you have? There are ways to work around it, obviously. You can be over the tax going into the season and shed money by the deadline and still not have to pay tax. That's the thing. So there's that. There's also, between Fred, between Gary, between Yak, if you can get them in at like 65, 70 million, they have ways of shedding money, whether it's Otto Porter Jr. in the offseason. Maybe a contender wants him for a second-round pick or something like that, as he's going to be back next year, probably opt in. You've also got the potential of Chris Boucher, who makes $12.5 million. Maybe you can offload him somewhere to free up that money to keep your guys around. There are ways to do this. The cap wizards figure out ways to do this all the time under the cap, and so I don't think the cap stuff necessarily worries me as much as just the potential of you got 3 dudes there who are uncertain and kind of hanging out there. There's the comment here from TB pointing out, treadmill baby, woo. And look, I get the fear of being a treadmill team too. You don't want to be a treadmill team, but I think to say this team is a treadmill team, is premature. They're in year 2 of whatever this is. We don't know what this is. Would you have said the 2015 Raptors were in year 2, were a treadmill team? Maybe you would have, but then they stopped being on the treadmill and improved and won 50 plus games and advanced and advanced and advanced. That was, I think, what they're going for here. Once again, they're early in that timeline. And so it feels like you're on the treadmill. It's backwards from what last year was. Hopefully by the end of this season, we can get some fun ball in and maybe you feel a little better about where things sit. But I understand the fear of the treadmill. I just think that is undercutting Scotty Barnes' existence. The dude's 21 years old. He is your vehicle to internal growth. And to me, this move to get Poeltl and not move off these other guys is kind of a declaration that the Raptors front office believes fully and wholeheartedly that Scotty Barnes is going to become that dude. Whatever that dude looks like, whether he's a top 15 player, whether he's a top 20 player, a top 10 player, whatever it is, he's going to be someone who you can say is a franchise player. This is what they're saying here, and that they can have growth via the internal growth you get from a Scotty Barnes, not to mention a Precious Achiuwa, not to mention whomever they take in the first round this year, whether it's, again, it could be the 6th pick, it could be the 18th pick, we don't really know just yet. However, that I think is the argument here, is you have internal, you have upward mobility just with the guys you have on hand right now. And maybe you don't buy it. Maybe you don't think Scotty Barnes is that dude. And if that's the case, then there are bigger problems for sure. I think there's been plenty to look at with Scotty Barnes, the clutch scoring, the obviously the ability to kind of take over a game when he wants to, get to his spots when he wants to. All of those things, I think, translate in the future to a star-level player in Scotty Barnes. You have the beautiful passing vision. I think there is a defensive role for him. And actually, I think playing next to Jakob Poeltl, that sort of roamer role that I think Scotty's been really good with lately, that feels like maybe the sort of silo you put him in, the lane you put him in defensively and say, this is the type of defender you're going to be, Scotty. You're going to be a help side rim protector. You're going to roam. You're going to be long. You're going to jump passing lanes. You're going to do kind of what the Celtics ask of Robert Williams, even. Just kind of hanging out off ball and causing a mess with length and all of that. You get less exposed with the things he's not so good at defense. I think that's the avenue off the treadmill here. And look, there's other downsides too, right? If for those who love the lottery and were super hyped on potentially tanking down for a Wembanyama or a Scoot Henderson, or at least a shot at one of those two, you're never getting into the top 5 or 4. But obviously lottery luck happens in all sorts of ways. But for those who are draft lovers and don't get to count the lottery balls because the Raptors are very clearly making a push here for some sort of climb in the standings, I get the disappointment for sure. Being able to draft high-end talent guys helps matters quite a bit. I just feel like they clearly think Scotty Barnes is that dude. They've already gotten their lottery luck. Why toil down there longer than you have to when you can say, hey, we didn't get the development we wanted this season, but we have good players on the roster. We have a guy now in Jakob Poeltl who makes the roster make a little bit more sense. We got lineups that can make a little bit more sense. We still have guys like Precious and Scotty on the climb. There's no reason to nuke this thing and have to restart from scratch because there's a world in which Scotty Barnes grows into the type of player who looks around and sees the supporting cast of Jakob Poeltl and Pascal Siakam and OG and Trent and Fred, or, one of those two, however many you keep in the offseason. He looks around and says, damn, look at this incredibly good supporting cast I have. I want to play here for a long time. That's how you manage a star. You want to be Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks, where you're making desperation trades for Kyrie Irving because you failed to build a supporting cast around Luka Doncic for 5 years? That's a really risky game to play. And I think the Raptors are doing a smart thing here in not overreacting to a bad start to the season. Again, there's a difference between being a bad team and a team that's played badly. I don't think they're a bad team. I've said all along there is a good team hidden somewhere within their midst. Whether that's going to come out remains to be seen. It better come out in the last 26 games, or there will be big changes in the offseason, I would assume. But I like the idea of patience here. It's not the worst thing in the world to be patient. It's one of the great market inefficiencies. And that was another thing Masai Ujiri talked about today. And it's always nice when I say things that Masai then later agrees with. But, I've said all along, I think we get too quick with the trigger of this team's going nowhere, got to change it up. Give it time. Give it, the Raptors won a championship waiting 7 years to get to the top of the mountain. It happens like that sometimes. It's not to say they're going to do it again and climb the mountain in the exact same poetic fashion they did, but the sound, the soundness of the plan does make a lot of sense to me. So again, I totally get the disappointment from some people. I understand it for sure. I think the vision here is clearer than it ever really has been before. I don't think they're married to everyone has to be 6'9" and versatile. I think they realized they had to get a real big man in there. There was, Masai mentioned, him and Nurse. No, yeah, we got to get a big in here. We got to do this thing. And as Andre points out, yeah, Fred, Trent, and Poeltl are free agents. That's the downside here. One of those guys leaves for nothing, you're screwed. It's bad. It's bad asset management. It could blow up in their face. I can't imagine they go into this with 3 pending UFAs, not thinking they can either keep them or flip them and sign in trades in the offseason. Because again, sign in trades are a tool. They got Precious Achiuwa in a sign in trade. You can get stuff in sign in trades, especially in a league where cap space is at a premium and it's really hard to sign guys straight into space. So yeah, and a good point here from Nameless pointing out that this is a much more polished version of Jakob Poeltl than we've seen before. That's totally true. They're going to be able to run fun offense through him. I think the combination of him working from the elbows and, Scotty working short rolls and Pascal working short rolls, there's going to be a lot of weird, fun, big man passing. That's cool. That's fun. Start dropping your questions, please, in the chat here. I will get to some questions in the final segment of the show. Before I do that, just a reminder, over on the Locked On NBA channel, you can go check it out. We have the Game to Game show, which is your nightly recap of all that's gone on in the NBA. If you missed the games, it's a wonderful place to go get refreshed on everything you might have missed. And there will be a trade deadline specific one running through all the trades coming up tomorrow morning on the Locked On NBA channel. So go subscribe to Game on Locked On NBA. Let's get to some questions now, shall we? Let's hold on. Let me drop this stupid Chiron thing and let's bring in some questions, shall we? All right. Question here from Andre. Who are the starters now? Who are your projected starters? This is fun. I think for me, there's lots of ways you could go, right? I do think we probably see Precious Achiuwa back to the bench. I think, obviously, you're going to have Fred and Pascal in there, and you're going to have OG in there once he's back and healthy. I'm assuming we're just talking about at full health. For tomorrow, I would guess Poeltl in for Achiuwa, and then you roll with the starting 5 they'd run with otherwise. I do think we'll probably see Fred, OG, Scotty, Pascal, Yak as a starting point. Just, they're going to mix it up. They're going to try things. They're going to go with different looks, but I do think the idea of a bigger sort of group there, that could be a very good defensive unit. And you need the shooting. You need Siakam to shoot the way he did last night, not the way he has of late. You need OG to bomb away. You need Fred to be shooting. Otherwise, I think you can make it work. Obviously, Scotty's been at least willing to shoot of late. I don't hate that look. But I do think there are going to be ways in which you can change it up, right? We'll see games where they close with the small starting 5 that they've used a lot this year. We'll see games where Precious closes on the wing, maybe in a place of a Scotty, just for that little extra sort of off-ball, catch and drive type of stuff that Scotty maybe doesn't do all the time as an off-ball player. The nice thing is, as Nameless points out, in the chat here, there's just more stuff the Raptors can do, more different combinations they can roll with. I think we might see Gary Trent Jr. start in place of OG sometimes. We'll see. It might have something to do with the politics of who they're trying to keep and all of that too. That's certainly something for Nick Nurse to figure out here. You would hope there's open communication. But the other thing about Poeltl is that you add him to the rotation, it's just fewer minutes everyone's going to have to play. So you can get other guys various pockets within the game where they can cook and get their looks. And so it's, the picks, the pick protections, obviously, we didn't even talk about those. We did in the earlier show. Don't love the pick protections. There are things to quibble with on this deal, but as an on-court fit, I think Jakob Poeltl is going to help the Raptors a ton. And that starting five question is a really good one without a clear answer, I don't think. But I would imagine we'll see Fred, OG, Scotty, Pascal, and Poeltl be your sort of go-to starting five now. And that could be a hell of a defensive unit if it all kind of lines up. A couple of questions here regarding the buyout market from Cher and Sean. With Cher, I pulled you up on here. Who can the Raptors target in the buyout market? So the Raptors do have one open spot. You're going to scream at me. Terrence Ross. Look, Patrick Beverley's out there, but imagine he's probably going to go find his way back to Minnesota where he's loved in a way that he's not loved by anybody else. Will Barton's an interesting guy, although I don't think Will Barton is a particularly talented player, or at least not like a useful, positive play-driving player. Frankly, the one guy I really wish the Raptors had right now, and if I have a quibble with what the Raptors have done here, if they were going to go and buy and get Jakob Poeltl, why didn't they also try to make a move for Monte Morris on the Wizards? The Wizards suck. Monte Morris would be a perfect ninth man on this team. That would have been awesome. Really wish they had done that and kind of doubled down on fixing the holes with this roster. But that's besides the point. With buyout market guys, a Terrence Ross will be a lot of fun. I would have a great time with Terrence Ross back on the team. Not that it should all be just bringing back old dudes and remembering some guys and then bringing said guys back to your team. Nostalgia isn't always the best move, but I do think in this case, a Terrence Ross bombing off the bench would be not the worst thing in the world. And truthfully, the buyout market is so long. The list is endless. I don't know if I have a great candidate top of mind. Pat Bev, take or leave. I guess if you're making the play-in, Pat Bev is the perfect guy to have on your team. Let's get to another question here. Does anyone else have any questions? About Super Chats. Someone just dropped in a question here. I don't know how that works. I'll figure that out for the next live show. I apologize. Let's go to the next one here. Sher Khan, once again, what is the max combined number for the three free agents this coming summer? So, again, I kind of ran through the last segment. The theoretical, cap math they got to work around. It's about $60 million per our friend Daniel Hackett over at Raptors HQ, who I confirmed this with. It's about $60 million if they end up waiving Thad Young, that they have to get those three guys in under. Obviously, I think getting off Kem Birch's money helps in all this too. It's kind of an underrated part of that Kem deal, as much as they shouldn't have signed the Kem deal the way it was originally. Maybe I do think I do think the. Oh my God, my brain just stopped working for a second. It's been a long day. I do think getting off of Kem's money for next year does very much help matters. Either way, I think if you're looking at like 16 for Jakob Poeltl, the report from Michael Grange was that Gary Trent Jr. is probably not going to command that crazy a market just because of what I talked about, right? He's the type of guy who gets squeezed by the market. I would imagine 4 years, $80 million is not crazy. $20 million a year for Gary Trent Jr. seems doable. Maybe it's 22, something along those lines. So it's a bit more of a raise on what he's making right now. But for Gary Trent Jr., you lock in a 4-year deal at $85 million, you're still going to hit free agency again when you're 27, 28. And so he's still got a lot of earning potential here. With Fred VanVleet, that's where it's interesting. I think it's probably going to end up being around $30 million a year, 4 years, 120, 4 years, 130, something like that. And I know people might bristle at that. Fred VanVleet's been awesome of late. And with a Jakob Poeltl there to clean up the defensive messes, I think the defensive drop-off you've seen from him does, in theory, get a little bit less dramatically damaging to the team. Plenty of teams survive not great point guard defense, and they do it by having good rim protection. And so as one of the things, they also need good wing defense and help defense and all that stuff. But I do think the Poeltl addition really helps with the drop-off we've seen from Fred defensively. And his offense has looked awesome. I think he's a really great fit on this team. I maintain that. When Fred's at his best, he's a perfect on-paper fit next to Pascal and Scotty in particular. Great fit next to Jakob Poeltl as well. He's got himself a role partner now. Jakob Poeltl's shooting 63% around the rim, or as a field goal percentage over the last little while here. He's a good finisher. I think it's nice. So yeah, I think between Fred at 35-ish, or not 35, 30 to 32 probably. You throw in Yak at the $16 million range, and then you get Gary for 20. What's the math there? About 70 million, just over 70, 72 maybe for those guys. That probably requires moving off of a Chris Boucher, which, might hurt, obviously. He's been very good of late, but, I also think there's a very real chance one of Gary or Trent gets signed and traded in the offseason, and that kind of solves the money problems for them. Either way, let's get to another quick question here before we round out the show. Let's go here with Dunn out here. What happens when they go cold on shooting? Look, the Raptors have been cold on shooting all season long. I don't think Jakob Poeltl really changes things that much. They haven't had shooting from the center position one time all year. There have been a couple of flourishes where Precious Achiuwa's had good nights, but he's shooting 24% from three on the season. The Raptors have made it work offensively without being a good three-point shooting team. I think that's to their credit, honestly. They've changed the way they play offense over the last month or so, and they have been around the top 10 since January 1st. Defense has always been the bigger issue. And so if they're having trouble shooting, maybe their defense can actually, for once, help them stop the dam when the offense is sputtering, although we've seen less of the sputtering of the offense of late. So yeah, I think adding Jakob Poeltl to the mix does help a lot of these issues. Let's get to this one also from Sherkhan. What's the possibility of a sign and trade with the Clippers if Fred is asking 35 plus mil a year? Totally possible. Maybe this is where Terrence Mann comes back in. I don't know. The Clippers felt to me like a perfect landing spot for Fred. They really did, and didn't happen. That's I would have done a deal involving a Luke Kennard and a Terrence Mann and a first-round pick. I think the framework I put out there with those guys, Emir Coffey in the 2028 first, I easily would have done that, I think, for Fred as just like a way to clean up the books. I love Terrence Mann. I think he's really cool, really good. That said, you leave yourself without a point guard, and they need a point guard. They really badly need a point guard. Like, point guard play is important. As much as center play is important, point guard play is important, and I don't think Scotty Barnes is ready just yet to take the reins as your full-time point guard. And so I would bet, actually, if there is a sign and trade with someone, it'd be Gary over Fred, but I'm just talking out of my butt over here too. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not connected. I just look at things and read between lines. Another point here, not a question, but this one from Top Shot Tesla, asking, I don't want Scotty coming up in a losing culture. This is the argument for me as to why you do what the Raptors have done here today. Again, there was a middle of the road move where it wasn't a tear it down to the studs type of rebuild or anything like that, but obviously, the more you give yourself a chance to win, the better. I think there is this sort of unspoken decay that can happen with teams that lose a lot. And the Raptors have lost a lot of late. That Tampa season was damaging. Had they gone through the rest of this season and opted to just stink through the rest of the year, shut guys down, that has damaging negative value impact. It's not just that you break confidence. You're not actually playing real basketball. You're not building continuity. You're not building your style of play or your identity. And you're potentially alienating guys who, in the NBA, you don't want to alienate anyone who's very good, because losing guys who are very good is crippling to your franchise. So this is, again, I think a big reason why going and ensuring you're going to have a better shot at winning games down the stretch of the season, ensuring you have a better chance of being the good team that you haven't been so far this year, that all, I think, has positive value to it. Again, especially if you weren't going to get the actual deals you wanted to in exchange for Fred or OG or Trent at the deadline. Might have time for one more question here. Before we, so if anyone wants to pop them in, please do. You get 1 second. You get 5 seconds to get a question in. Please get them in. But yeah, I think overall, I'm not as cold on this deadline as I thought I might be if they did nothing. Because I think Masai's explanations, maybe it's just using the party line and saying, hey, they said the thing's good. That I listened to him and it's all good. And maybe I'm just a mark. But I do feel like the logic makes sense. It's disappointing. It feels hollow. It feels like a bit of a half measure. But I also don't think you can really say with any certainty whether this is good or not until you get to the offseason and see how they play with their free agents and with OG as well. Obviously this could easily blow up. And Nicola, yes, you're right. My smoke detector's been going off all day. I apologize for that. I haven't been able to leave this desk for like 7 hours. So gonna get it fixed. Either way, last question here from the guy, Matt, asking, now to the end of the season, what do you think you want to see the most? A push to as high as you can get in the play-in or potentially the 6th seed would be awesome. They're not too far out of it, obviously. They have a very easy schedule coming up here. That would be swell. Mostly, I want to see if they can find a way to sort of weaponize OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. in sort of it's tough to say. I do think those guys are the sort of inherent tension with this team right now, right? They are two guys who are role players, who are overqualified for the role player duties they're being asked to perform. And I understand why they might want more. If the reports are to be believed, I understand why OG might want more of a role. I get it. However, like those are good players. Like, moving on from those guys is not easy. So I think the alternative to moving on from them is find a way to make it work with what you got. And can you find complementary lineups? Can you find in between lineups? Can you find a regular rotation? For Christ's sake, get the same guys playing night to night. So there's some continuity, some understanding, some role definition. I guess that's the thing, is role definition and, kind of a continuation of what we've seen over the last month or so. I really like OG Anunoby. I don't think he's good enough to allocate a ton of possessions to try to figure out his on-ball game, because I don't think the on-ball game is all that great. But if you can find a way to scratch whatever itch he has just enough to keep him happy, that to me is sort of the big challenge down the stretch this season. Finding different combinations that work with Yak, finding, it's a very weird, hard team to piece together. Lots of differing sort of overlapping skills that create on-court tension, all of that. Really what I want to see over these final 26 games is a way to harmonize it all together. And on the Nick Nurse side of things, I've been very critical of Nick Nurse. I've been worried about the way his just sort of general demeanor has, maybe impacted the overall feelings and vibes within the team. I think that matters. I think coach wear out is a thing, but this is an opportunity for Nick Nurse as well, who, again, Masai Ujiri said at his presser today, he didn't think he'd done a good enough job giving Nick Nurse the tools with which to operate and succeed with the team. He has his center now. Can he play a more reserved style of defense, or can he make his hyper-aggressive style of defense work with Jakob Poeltl as the backline cleanup man? We'll see. I think that is the thing, is just, can they shake some of the bad stuff that's dogged them for 56 games so far this year and find a way to get on some sort of run here with some sort of continuity, some sort of regularity in their rotations. Again, this could go really badly. If this is a disaster of the next 26 games, I think the view on what happens here is entirely different. And you can start to, throw your flaming piles of dog poo at OVO Center all you want. Please don't do that. I didn't say to do it if you did. But I do think that there's a very real chance that things do stabilize here. It's already been stabilizing, right? They have a positive point differential. They're winning more than they have not over the last month or so. I think they're going to move up. That I'm not too worried about. The Bulls stink. I don't think the Hawks are any good. The Knicks are whatever. Even the Nets could fall, although I think the Nets are kind of better than people will give them credit for, and they've got a bunch of wins banked. But there is, I think, a second and a half run coming here, and if they can achieve that, it means some pretty good things have happened, I think, as far as addressing some of the tensions that are at play here. And if not, then things get dicey. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out on the live show today. Thanks for those who asked questions. If I didn't get to your questions, I apologize. But this should be at least interesting. If nothing else, the Raptors are going to play interesting basketball again, which they haven't really been doing for a while. The offense has been interesting. The defense has just been like a lost cause. I'm excited to watch Raptors defense once again with Jakob Poeltl in tow, and we shall see how it all plays out. Thank you so much for tuning into the live show. This will be your Friday audio podcast as well if you're one of the audio listeners. I may be able to squeak in some sort of Jazz preview show tomorrow, but we'll see. I'm exhausted. My voice is fried. So TBD on if there's more content coming tomorrow, but there's the episode earlier today with Jakob Poeltl. I was on Locked On NBA for a quick chat with Kylan Mills about the deal as well and sort of the Raptors thinking here. So we will leave it there. Thank you so much. Go make your second listen of the day. Locked On Leafs, our pals Mike and Dave over there doing a great job covering a very playoff-bound team in your Toronto Maple Leafs. And should be a fun final 26 games, baby. Raptors Jazz tomorrow. Should be a blast. And thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.